In 2009, off the Antarctic peninsula, a humpback whale rolled onto its back and lifted a seal out of the water on its chest. Moments earlier, killer whales had washed that seal off its ice floe. They were still circling. Scientists went looking for other cases and found 115, stretching back 62 years. The obvious explanation: animals protect their own. Except in roughly 9 out of 10 of those fights, the animal being defended was not a humpback. Seals, sea lions, even a sunfish. A 30-ton whale keeps charging into fights that offer it nothing. Why? The humpback has a settled reputation. It sings, it migrates, it filters small fish through plates of baleen, and it minds its own business. That reputation survived right up until someone counted. The biologist who photographed the seal on the whale's chest was Robert Pittman, and the image bothered him enough that he and his colleagues went digging through decades of field notes, whaling logs, and eyewitness reports. The result, published in the journal Marine Mammal Science, was a file of 115 separate encounters between humpback whales and killer whales, the oldest from 62 years before. One rescue photo is an anecdote, 115 is a behavior, and buried in that file was the detail that changes the story. In 57% of those encounters, the humpbacks started it. They were not defending themselves from a passing attack. They detected a hunt, often from well out of sight, and traveled toward it. The killer whales involved were almost always the mammal hunting kind, the ecotype that eats seals and whale calves, rather than the fish eaters that pose no threat to anyone with blubber. Whatever pulls a humpback across open water, it responds to the specific sound of mammals being hunted. One honest caveat before going further: these 115 records are opportunistic. Nobody ran a controlled study. People simply wrote down what they saw, and today there are far more cameras on the water than in 1950. The file shows the behavior is real and repeated. It cannot say how often it happens unseen. So, what actually happens when the giant arrives in the middle of someone else's hunt? Start with the hunt itself, because it is one of the most precise operations in the ocean. Around the Antarctic peninsula, killer whales take seals resting on ice floes by charging in formation and pumping their tails in unison, throwing a coordinated wave that washes the seal into the water. Researchers who track these hunts watch the whales manufacture, on average, about 4 waves per successful attack. It is careful, cooperative, and quiet. Then the humpback arrives, and the operation falls apart. Witnesses describe the same repertoire across the record. The whale charges in trumpeting, a blast of sound driven through its blowhole. It slaps the water with flippers that reach 4 to 5 meters, the longest of any whale. It swings its tail. Above all, it uses its body, up to 16 meters and around 40 tons of it, as a wall, parking itself between the hunters and their target. An orca is 6 to 8 meters. The wall wins by existing. That is what the 2009 photograph caught mid-act. The seal, washed off its floe, scrambled onto the humpback's upturned chest. When it began sliding back toward the water, the whale nudged it back into place with a flipper. The seal eventually reached another floe and hauled out, alive. And this is not a story from one strange summer. In 2023, cameras off Antarctica caught 2 humpbacks pushing into an orca seal hunt again. To be fair to the record, the giant does not always win. Some hunts continue after the interference, some end before help arrives at all. Which brings up the strangest case in the file. It lasted 6.5 hours, and the animal at the center of it was already dead. Monterey Bay, California, May 2012. A group of killer whales ran down a gray whale mother and her calf, and after a long chase, the calf was killed. That part is nature working as documented, and it happens off Monterey every spring. What happened next is the part researchers still cite. 2 humpback whales were already on the scene during the attack. After the calf died, more kept arriving until observers counted around 16, and then they stayed. One humpback stationed itself a single body length from the calf's carcass, head pointed toward it, and held that position for 6.5 hours, trumpeting and slashing its tail every time a killer whale moved in to feed. This is the account of Elisa Schulman-Janiger, the killer whale researcher who watched it unfold. Run the costs on that afternoon. A humpback cannot eat a seal, a gray whale, or anything else in this story. Its throat is built for krill and small fish. So the whales burned hours of energy in close range of the ocean's top predator over an animal that was not theirs, could not be saved, and offered them nothing. There was no rescue available. There was only interference, extended long past any practical point. The vigil breaks both easy stories at once. If this is rescue, there was nothing left to rescue. If this is a cold reflex, reflexes do not usually hold a position into the 7th hour. To explain what force could build behavior like this, you have to start with what killer whales do to humpbacks. Killer whales do not, as a rule, tangle with healthy adult humpbacks. The size gap is unforgiving. But a humpback calf is a different animal, slow, naive, and born thousands of kilometers from the feeding grounds it must reach. Off Western Australia, researchers documented that orca attacks on humpbacks concentrate almost entirely on calves in nursery waters and along that first migration. The evidence is written on the survivors. Orca teeth leave parallel scars called rake marks, and in North Pacific surveys, roughly 1 in 5 humpback calves carries them on its flukes, against about 1 in 9 adults. In some regions, the numbers run higher. Every one of those scarred whales is an animal that met killer whales young and lived, which suggests an explanation with no mystery in it at all. A mother humpback that responds instantly and violently to the sound of orcas hunting will sometimes arrive in time to save her own calf. Over enough generations, that builds a rule into the species. Hear the hunt, charge the hunt. Evolution does not need the whale to understand why. The rule just has to fire faster than the orcas can finish, because the cost of ignoring a real attack on your calf is total, while the cost of a false alarm is a wasted afternoon. The researchers behind the 115-case file proposed exactly this as the engine, and as far as it goes, it works. It explains the charging, the trumpeting, the long approaches toward the sound of trouble. It explains, in other words, the 1 fight in 10 where the animal under attack is a humpback. The other 9 are still sitting there, unexplained. Here is the number that keeps this behavior in the scientific literature instead of just the highlight reels. In 89% of the documented encounters, the animal being defended was not a humpback. It was a Weddell seal on a floe, a sea lion, a gray whale calf, and in one recorded case, an ocean sunfish, an animal. A humpback has no relationship with whatsoever. Science has 2 candidate readings, and they pull in different directions. The first is mobbing. Songbirds do it to hawks. The targets of the harassment are the predators themselves. In this reading, the humpback is not defending a seal at all. It is attacking killer whales, the predator that hunts its calves wherever it finds them at a disadvantage. And in over half the well-observed encounters, the humpbacks did go after the orcas directly. The seal that survives is a bystander who got lucky. The second reading is the one the researchers themselves put on the table. With a careful name, inadvertent altruism, the charge the hunt rule fires on the sound of orcas attacking mammals. By the time the humpback arrives, whoever is under attack gets the wall. Checking the victim species first would cost seconds a calf might not have, so the rule stays broad and other animals ride along on its protection. What would separate the two? Watching whether humpbacks ever break off once they see the victim is not a whale. In 115 cases, that has not been clearly recorded. Both readings survive the evidence, and their authors say so. So, the honest verdict has 2 halves. The behavior is real, repeated, and humpback-initiated. The dataset settles that. What it feels like from inside the whale, whether anything in there resembles what we would call caring, is not something 115 field reports can answer. The behavior is perfectly consistent, only the explanation is not. Strip away everything uncertain, and one hard fact remains. Killer whales eat everything in the sea. Seals, sharks, even blue whales. Nothing hunts them, and yet the record shows exactly one animal that makes them break off a hunt and leave over and over for 62 years and counting. The why splits down the middle and probably always will. Half of it is answered. Evolution built a hair trigger into a 30-ton body because the calf it saves is sometimes its own. The other half, what happens inside the whale when it holds a dead calf's vigil into the 7th hour, sits beyond what any dataset can reach. So pick your side. A reflex wearing a hero's costume, or something closer to the thing we feel when we stop a stranger's fight. Tell me where you land in the comments and send this to someone who still thinks whales just sing and swim. Because the next time an orca hunt goes suddenly, strangely quiet, it usually means the same thing. The giant herd. The giant is coming.